So I, 29, female, just gave birth about 3 weeks ago, and my son and I are currently living with my in-laws because of a horrible fight with my husband, Michael, 32, male. Michael said that he wanted me to get a paternity test 2 weeks after our son was born because he suspected that the child was his brother's. For context, his brother Brian, 29, and I went to college together. Brian and I have been great friends ever since the first day of college, and incidentally, it was through Brian that I met my husband, so I can't understand why he's so insecure all of a sudden. My parents live in Iowa, and we went to college in Buffalo. Brian lived nearby, and he once invited me home because I had been feeling very homesick in my first year. That's how I met Michael for the first time. Michael and I exchanged numbers, but we didn't start talking until after I graduated college. We became friends, and after that, we started dating after being in a relationship for almost 4 years. We got married 3 years back. And so far, everything has been perfect. We were great together, and Brian and I were still really close as friends. The three of us often hung out together in a group, and Michael had never had a problem with it. It was only after I entered the 8th month of my pregnancy that Michael started acting weird around us. He started distancing himself from me and spending more time at work. I chalked it up to him being nervous about the baby and tried to fix the situation by trying to tell him that he would be a great father and that he had nothing to be nervous about. However, even that didn't seem to help, so I decided to focus on my health until the baby was born. I believed that after our baby was born, he would start acting normal again, but that didn't happen. He refused to spend any time with our son and always made up some excuse not to be around us. He would spend most of his day at work, and when he came back, he would tell me that he was too tired to be with the baby. I tried to put up with it, but when his behavior didn't change even after 2 weeks, I decided to confront him about it. One day, when he came back home from work, I sat him down and told him that I needed to talk to him about his strange behavior. He tried to convince me that he was just tired from work and stuff, and that this had nothing to do with me or the baby, but I didn't buy it. I voiced my concerns and told him that if he didn't speak up and tell me what his problem was, then I wouldn't be able to stay with him anymore, because it was really hurting me to have him ignore us like this. So then he finally told me that he didn't believe that the baby was his, and he suspected that I'd been having an affair with Brian and the child was actually his, so now he wanted me to get a paternity test for our son. He had no reason to accuse me of something so serious because I had never treated Brian as anything more than a good friend. So it felt like a slap on the face when he said that he wanted a paternity test. I started screaming at him almost immediately because I had already been feeling emotionally unstable thanks to all the post-pregnancy hormones, and that combined with his strange behavior around us had pushed me to the edge. His accusing me of having an affair with his brother was the last thing that I needed. When I started yelling at him, he told me that this was exactly what he had expected, which is why he hadn't brought it up so far and tried to walk out of the room. But that was really big, and I wasn't going to let him drop a bomb on me and then walk away, so I demanded an explanation. He then told me that several weeks ago, when I had invited a few of my college friends to our house for dinner, he'd overheard a conversation between Brian and another friend who had stayed with him. Apparently, the two of them had been talking about how everyone had expected me to end up with Brian because we seemed to get along so well, and Brian had just laughed it off instead of saying something to defend Michael. I didn't even understand what he wanted Brian to defend him from, because it wasn't as if saying that everyone had expected him to end up with me was an attack on Michael somehow. It isn't odd for people in college to think that friends of opposite genders might get together in the future, and they were just gabbing about the past. It was harmless and fun, but ultimately it meant nothing. Because Brian was my friend and Michael was my husband. That should have been enough for him to feel secure. But he took that too hard and he began to believe that maybe Brian and I did have a thing going on. That's why he had been acting so strange ever since the day of the dinner party. He was suspecting me of having an affair with his brother and being disloyal to him over a conversation that I wasn't even a part of. It was insane, and I tried to explain to him that he sounded really stupid, but it didn't matter to him, and he said that now that everything was out in the open, he wouldn't talk to me until I got a paternity test done and he knew for sure that the baby was his. Under normal circumstances, I never would have had an issue with a paternity test, but this just seemed ridiculously stupid. I couldn't believe that he was accusing me of cheating on him with his brother even after being with me for so long. I was really angry and upset, so I decided to take our son and leave the house. He didn't even try to stop me as I left, but I soon realized that I had messed up because I had nowhere to go. I didn't want to go to any friend's house because then I would have to explain to them what happened, and this was just very personal. I would have gone to Brian's place, but that would just reinforce what Michael already believed, and I didn't think that it was appropriate under these circumstances anyway. With nobody else to turn to, I decided to go to his parents' house since I was sure that I could count on them. They seemed to like me, and they were my best bet after Brian. So the day that I left, after wandering around for a bit, I headed to my in-laws' house, and they gladly took me in. When I explained to them why Michael and I had been fighting, they seemed really embarrassed and apologized to me on his behalf. But they also told me that it was really out of character for Michael to be so insecure, especially when it came to Brian, because the two of them had always been close and never had the kind of crazy sibling rivalry that others do. And I agreed. It really was out of character for Michael to be insecure about his brother. The three of us were a tight-knit group, and that's how it had always been. So this sudden change in Michael's behavior made no sense to any of us. Nonetheless, his parents told me that I was free to live with them for as long as I wanted to, and they would respect whatever decision I made regarding my relationship with their son. They told me that even if I decided to get divorced, they would support me, but in the meantime, they would do their best to make Michael apologize to me and actually mean it. They kept trying to talk sense into him for a while, but on the third day they informed me that they had decided to cut him off until he stopped acting like an idiot. This would be a problem for him because his parents were supposed to let him take over their family-owned textile business in a few months. His parents were retiring and he had been in the running to inherit their business, but if they cut him off, Brian would end up inheriting it, and since he had no interest in running a business, he would probably sell it off, but then Michael would get nothing out of it. But the truth was that my in-laws only wanted him to reconsider what he was asking of me and accusing me of scaring him into thinking that he was going to lose the business. They didn't really have any intention of letting the business go to Brian because they knew that he would sell it and they had worked hard to build a brand for themselves. They were obviously not going to throw it all away over my fight with Michael. They told me that they were just going to let Michael think that they were cutting him off for good, and eventually he would come around and apologize to me. Then we could sort things out between the two of us, be it by getting back together or getting divorced. Their only goal was to make him apologize to me and talk things through with me, and I appreciated that they were doing so much for me because I had nobody else to count on. I couldn't tell any of my friends, and I definitely couldn't talk to Brian about any of this because this had a lot to do with him. So Michael's parents were the only ones keeping me sane. After his parents told him that they were going to cut him off, we expected him to reach out to me immediately to sort things out, but he waited for a day before contacting me. When he called me 2 days ago, I expected him to apologize to me, but as soon as I picked up the call, he started screaming at me and accusing me of trying to manipulate his parents into giving Brian control of the business so that the two of us could benefit from it, because apparently he was my lover now. I could hear his voice cracking and knew that he had been crying, which made me feel terribly guilty. He told me that he knew what I was trying to do and he couldn't believe that I was cheating him out of a business as well as his baby. He called me heartless and whatnot before I finally told him that his parents were not going to give the business to Brian. They were just trying to scare him into thinking exactly that so that he would contact me and talk to me. He went silent for a while after I told him that, and then he said that I was just evil incarnate. He said that he couldn't believe that now I was even trying to turn his parents against him just because he had valid concerns about the true paternity of the baby that he was supposed to be raising for the rest of his life. It was infuriating to hear him talk about how valid his concerns were when in reality his only concerns stemmed from a stupid conversation that he had overheard. I tried to argue with him, but he told me that instead of wasting both our time by fighting, I could just do the right thing and get a paternity test. He accused me of being manipulative to get my way and told me to keep his parents out of this. I just feel helpless and have no idea what to do anymore. AITA for not wanting to get a paternity test? Update 1. I decided not to go through with the paternity test and instead filed for divorce. It's been one crazy week since the last update and so much has happened that I don't even know where to start. But first things first, thank you so much for all the comments and the advice. Now, coming to why I have decided to get a divorce from Michael. After that last phone call with him, I confided in his parents and told them that their plan to scare him into apologizing and sorting things out with me had backfired miserably, and now things were even worse than before. I also told them how he had accused me of manipulating them, but they reassured me that they were happy to have me because I was the mother of their grandchild, and even apart from that, they had known me for the longest time, and they loved me because I was a part of their family. And since I lived away from my parents for Michael's sake, it was their duty to take care of me and look out for me when I was going through a rough patch. Hearing his parents say such nice things about me made me feel less lonely and more sure of myself. So after talking to them, I decided to tell my parents and Brian about the situation because my in-laws didn't want their opinion to be the only one that I was taking into consideration, since other people might have a better idea of how to go ahead. When I told my parents about what Michael had said, they told me that they would support me regardless of what decision I made. The only reason nobody was telling me to leave Michael, despite how obviously wrong he was because of our son. I hate to say it about my son, but having a child with Michael is really complicated because I had to think about our kid's future before I made any decision. And then I had the most difficult conversation of them all when I spoke to Brian about what was going on. When I told Brian about what his brother had accused me of and asked him about the conversation that he had overheard, he started looking really uncomfortable, and I realized that both of them knew more than what they were letting on. So I pushed Brian and forced him to tell me what he knew because I was sure that he was hiding something from me, and so was Michael, since people don't just start suspecting their wife over something so petty. A lot of you in the comments had also suggested that there might be something that Michael was hiding from me because it just didn't add up. That after years of being okay with my friendship with his brother, he was suddenly not fine with it out of the blue. There had to be more to the story that he wasn't letting me know, but I had been too caught up thinking about the consequences of whatever was going on at the time, as well as looking after my son, to really consider things like this. But yes, Brian told me the truth, and now I hate both brothers because I couldn't even imagine people could be capable of being this stupid and heartless. Apparently, when Michael had overheard that conversation, he had also heard what happened after Brian laughed. Brian had said to that friend that even he had expected that the two of us would get together after college, but life had other plans and his brother got in the way. So Michael was actually mad about that. not just because Brian laughed it off. And that made a lot more sense because Michael's version seemed a little too petty and incomplete to me. And the reason I didn't find out about it until now was because Michael had promised his brother that he wasn't going to tell me what he heard that day. Brian had been discussing this with his friend in the backyard, and he hadn't seen Michael standing around, but as soon as he heard what Brian had said, Michael went up to him and confronted him about it. That friend went back into the house, but even he didn't tell me anything later on, which I can forgive because he and I are not as close as I am to the others, obviously. When Michael confronted Brian and asked him what he had meant when he said that he had expected me to get with him after college, Brian ended up confessing that he had feelings for me and had been waiting for us to graduate so he could ask me out because he knew that I had a strict no dating policy until I graduated. But I ended up getting together with Michael instead, and that had been his first heartbreak. But he dealt with it somehow and tried not to let it show because he wanted us to be happy. And I have to say he did a pretty good job. Because for so many years I never had a clue that he had feelings for me, and neither did Michael. Brian was the one who begged Michael not to tell me about it because that would ruin our friendship and he didn't want that to happen. So Michael stayed true to his word and didn't tell me about what Brian had said that day. But Michael still had second thoughts about me and my relationship with Brian and began to suspect me. He knew that even if we did have a thing together, asking Brian would lead nowhere because he would just lie to him and get away with it. My guess is that he started getting paranoid after the day of the party, but since he had already promised Brian that he wouldn't bring it up with me, he just started distancing himself from us altogether. And over time, the paranoia just got worse, which is why he started accusing me of absurd things and demanding a paternity test for no reason. I'm guessing at what happened, but I don't know what exactly was going on in Michael's mind for the past couple of weeks, ever since he found out about Brian and his feelings towards me. Regardless of what he was thinking, it was ridiculous of him and I was not going to stand for it. It made no sense to me that he would rather cover for his brother than just talk to me and clear the air with all of us. It's actually crazy, and I can't think of one rational, logical explanation for any of this. Getting a divorce was the only option that I had because it had become very clear to me that there was no going back from here. I'm not talking to Brian anymore, but I'm still living with his parents who have been kind enough to let me stay with them and even get me a lawyer because it's their kids who got me into this mess, and they feel responsible for everything that's happening to me. They have been really supportive and helpful, and I couldn't be more thankful that I have such great in-laws. People like this are truly rare to come by. I have filed for a divorce, and soon enough Michael will be served. He and I haven't spoken since that phone call where he told me that getting a paternity test is the only way out of this. I guess he hadn't counted on me to file for divorce because I hadn't brought it up, since at the time I still believed that we could work past this. But that was stupid of me. There is no way we can work this out. He is being insane right now, and I don't think that's the kind of energy that I need around me as a new mom, still struggling to adjust to life with a baby. If he would rather cover for his brother and make me the bad guy by suspecting me of cheating on him with Brian instead of just doing the normal thing and talking about it, then I don't think he deserves to be a husband or a father. He can stick to being a good brother and a good son. I'll handle the rest, since our family doesn't mean as much to him as the one he was born into. Update 2. Hi guys, so Michael was served with the divorce papers today and he didn't see it coming. I have no clue why. He called me and asked me if I was really going to separate from him rather than just taking the easy way out and getting a paternity test done. So I told him that I knew exactly why he was upset because I had spoken to Brian and he had told me the truth. I told him that he was acting insane by covering for Brian instead of being transparent with me and telling me exactly why he was suspecting me. He replied saying that he had promised Brian that he wouldn't tell me because that would ruin our friendship. And when I asked him if keeping that promise was worth ruining our marriage, He said that it was because apparently he believed that he owed this to Brian. But he couldn't just shake off the feeling that something was going on between us. He said that he couldn't talk to Brian about it since he didn't think he'd get the truth from him because the guy had been hiding his feelings from everyone for so long. It was unlikely that he would be honest now, and neither could he talk to me since he had made a promise. So he started overthinking stuff, and that's how he ended up having a total meltdown on the day that I confronted him and demanded a paternity test to confirm if the baby was his. He said that my reaction just made him feel worse, and he started believing that I actually had been having an affair because if I didn't have anything to hide, then I would just have got the paternity test done. I tried to explain to him that this wasn't about me wanting to hide the truth, but rather because of how insulting it was to me that he didn't trust me and was suspecting me of something so awful. Even though I had already filed for divorce, I tried to explain to him that keeping that promise to his brother and not being honest with me had cost him his marriage and the chance of having a happy family. He was also not even speaking to Brian anymore. So what was the point of all that? But Michael was not ready to listen to sense and kept insisting that this was somehow my fault for not getting that test done when I still had time. He said that I should have been more understanding because he was in a tough position that I didn't even know of at the time, and he couldn't bring himself to ruin Brian's friendship with me because that was his brother. And neither could he live with the fact that there might have been something brewing between Brian and me, and the child might not even be his. He said that I should have realized there was a lot going on and at least tried to alleviate his worries by getting the paternity test done instead of making such a huge deal about it. It was an extremely frustrating conversation, and after a while, I gave up trying to make him see my side of things. He was clearly too hung up on his own insane anxieties to consider that maybe even other people had feelings. And he had deeply hurt mine. To him, some promise that he made to his brother was far more important than his wife and child, and yet he suspected this same brother to be the father of his kid? It didn't even make sense. And even while I'm typing this out, I feel like I'm going to cry because of how ridiculous this situation is. If I'm being honest, I think there might be something wrong with Michael because I can't think of any sane human being acting out like this. If I was in his place and I suspected that Brian had feelings for me, I would never have made any promises because my family would be my number one priority. And by family, I don't mean my brother, but the family that I chose for myself, my wife and my son. And even if I did promise my brother that I wouldn't ruin his relationship with my wife, I still wouldn't let myself go crazy and end up accusing my wife of cheating on me just because I was insecure. The fact that he wanted a paternity test only because he suspected me completely based on his feelings, with nothing to substantiate his fears, is what makes it even worse. Even today, the conversation that we had was completely based on what he was feeling at the moment, and he didn't even seem to care about this marriage. Had two people in it. And a divorce was going to affect both of us, not just him. He also didn't ask about our son and how he was doing, which was very upsetting because when all of this is over, my son might not have a father figure in his life through no fault of his own. It's these two brothers who messed up, and for some reason, the universe is punishing me and my son for it. It isn't fair, and most of it doesn't even make sense, really, but it is what it is. My parents are flying down in a couple of days to meet me because things are getting really awful. Michael's parents are still not speaking to either of their sons, and they have started to consider cutting both of them off permanently because they find all of this incredibly disappointing. They're considering letting one of their employees take over the business instead of Michael. I definitely think they should cut Michael off, but I don't know about Brian. He hasn't done anything terrible. He was just honest with Michael for once, and Michael was the one who let it get to his head and messed up his marriage. That's not on Brian, but it's his parents' decision, and I'm not going to interfere there. I'm just grateful that they are standing up for me. It might have something to do with the fact that they do want to see their grandson after the divorce, but regardless of everything, I still love and respect them because they have gone above and beyond in their attempts to make life easier for me right now. I don't think I would have been able to stand up for myself and file for divorce had it not been for them. It's crazy how supportive they are, even when it's their own son that they have to go up against. Update 3. Michael isn't contesting the divorce, and he also doesn't want custody of our son regardless of paternity. So that's what's happening right now. I'm not surprised, but I'm still quite disappointed. But at least I have an explanation for his behavior now. He reached out to his parents a few days back and told them that he had been to see a psychologist a few weeks ago, around 3 days after I moved out. They did a complete psychological evaluation and medical exam, and he had been diagnosed with a severe anxiety disorder very recently. It had taken several sessions with the doctors, but they had finally concluded that this is what was going on with him. It was shocking news for all of us because he had never exhibited any symptoms of mental illness before, so this had to be a very recent development. Or maybe he had, and we had all just missed it. There's been a lot of revelations about Michael and Brian in the past couple of weeks, so right now I'm inclined to believe that maybe I didn't know these people as well as I thought I did. Regardless of the medical condition, I still think that I have no reason to forgive him because he hasn't apologized to me. His mental state can be an explanation for his behavior at best, but not an excuse to do whatever he pleases and say whatever he wants to. He didn't even have the courtesy to inform me himself. He told his parents, and that's how I got to know. Apparently, he has also been fired from his job for not showing up for 1 week straight after I left, and he needs money to cover rent, which is another reason why he contacted his parents. I thought he might be lying about the anxiety disorder, but he had all the legitimate medical documents to prove it, so I guess it's real and this is happening. In a way, I think it's for the best. If he doesn't get to be with me or see his son for a while, not until he's better at least. The divorce proceedings are about to begin in a couple of days. My parents are already here and we're all living together in my in-laws' house, who have been gracious enough to open their home, even to my parents. I just pray that everything falls into place soon, and that I can regain some sense of normalcy in my life now. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.